So, as mentioned before, I try to keep the presentation itself short, cover the basics, and then we maybe go into talking to each other what we have in experience and what makes sense for us doing in our everyday lives concerning security. So, shortly for my background, mostly you covered the basics already anyway. I'm not a technician, so I was a graphic designer, educated as a graphic designer, as far as you can tell, educating as a graphic designer, because there's no formal school for that. Okay, there are more formal schools for doing something like that, but you don't need a degree or anything to do it. So it's just interest and yeah, whatever. But as Katrin mentioned, I'm a long-time activist, and I was actually involved in the trials back then when VGD was people tried to convict people from VGD for being a criminal organization and so on. And back then we learned a lot about how important it is to take actually care about computer security and privacy, because they really dug up emails from 20 years ago and tried to find passages in it and they could use to incriminate people. And it was just quotes from different emails from years apart and so on, and then in court they were asked, what did you mean by that? And of course, who would remember what they have said 20 years ago in an email in a private discussion with someone else? But it was very disturbing what they did there. So, first, what do I mean with computer security? It's not so clear as it might seem, because there are different parts to it. One of the parts is that, of course, you want to have permanent access to whatever you want to do on your computer. And if you, for example, use cloud services and so on, so directly on the internet, ich hoffe, es ist okay, dass wir das auf Englisch machen. Yeah, okay. And then you're dependent on those cloud services and on your internet connection. For example, if you're in a place where you don't have an internet connection, you wouldn't be able to use whatever you need to use if you go online with it. So that's a part of security as well, the security of having access to when you need it. And the other part, of course, is it's hardware part, because if you use different devices, they have different options, different possibilities what you can do with it, but as well, and more these days than in the past, some devices have backdoors in it, and even the companies selling you those devices might have access to the background, and it doesn't matter what you would install on these devices, they would still have access because it's so low in the system, in the hardware, that you cannot do anything about it. That's one of the reasons why I normally try to get old computers, because back then they didn't do it that well yet. And therefore on those computers it's easier to get privacy than on new ones. But in basic thing, you want to be able to do with your computer what you need to do, and you don't want anyone to interfere with that, what you want to do. So basically security means you are the boss on your own system. And that's the meaning I'm going for. And you should keep in mind the computers don't have their own mind and they will follow any command they get. If the permissions are right, they will follow the command. And therefore they won't distinguish between you giving the command or someone else connected to your device giving the command. It doesn't make a difference to your device. If the permissions are right, it works. And therefore you cannot rely on good sense on computers. It's just you need to make sure that even strange cases cannot happen if you depend on your privacy and on your security. Yeah, so that's the control part. Yeah, and what I as well want to mention is most computers have this issue that you normally buy them in a shop or order them online, and they come already pre-installed with software. And in most cases, there are exceptions, but not very many. The software installed is so-called proprietary software. And proprietary software, and that's the part I'm mostly concerned with, is software that is in the hands, and the source code especially, from companies, from private companies. And they keep what they're doing in the software, what it can do, what it cannot do, who has access and so on, private. So So you cannot get it. It's a secret, it's a trade secret. No one, not even governments, can look into it and check if what they claim it does is actually true. And you only get the executable files on your system, therefore you cannot really edit it. Basically, it's possible to analyze what it does, but it's very painful, slow, and hard to do. And there are very big, complicated systems, so it's almost impossible to really find out what they actually do. And in practice, no one would attempt that because it would take years to take one system apart with a big team, really find everything what it does and to understand it. Therefore, if you want to be your own boss on your system, you should use free software, because with free software you have the opportunity, if you know your stuff, you can check it yourself, because all the source code that defines what the programs do or do not is open, and you can look into it. Of course, we are mostly, I guess, not even here, programmers, and therefore we might not be able to check it ourselves. But there's a worldwide community that work on free software, and there are many people who are able to do that, and they look on each other's fingers. There might be a programmer in India doing some program and so on, and if that programmer has the idea, oh, I will check what my users are doing, I want to know more about them, and another user, maybe in Ukraine, thinks, okay, I want to have a private program, and looks through the code, and they say, okay, I don't want this spy function in my programs. They can throw it out because they are allowed to do so. Nobody can hinder them to do that. And therefore, if you want to be your own boss, you need to use software you can trust that it really does what it says it does, because nobody can hide anything in the source code. But if nobody has access to the source code, then of course they can hide it. And that's the main reason why I advocate for free software, because only there you have actually the opportunity to check it independently and not just believing the claims of the corporation giving it out. Yeah, and I alluded to it before already, the different security aspects. And those are the most important ones, basically. You have the hardware layer, then you have the software you install on this hardware. So it's the free software I was talking about. But then there's also the network, and that's very often not thought of. Because if you connect your totally secure device to the internet, it's exposed to the internet, and whoever is there might have opportunities or more knowledge than you, and might get access to your system, even if your system itself would be secure. And the fourth is as well one not very often thought of, social interaction. For example, if you have a computer and you have set very good passwords and good software, and you protect it from the internet with a firewall and whatever, if you tell someone your passphrase, because it's a friend or whatever, and maybe you fight later on, he will still know your passphrase. So you should basically never do something like that. And if you do, at least change the passphrase afterwards. But that's things, they're very easy to do, but many people never think about it because it's so self-evident that you trust your own circle and so on. But those are the things most times, those are the things that happen or that cause problems in the long run. You told it several different, maybe your ex-partner and so on, never thought of changing your passphrase, and later on they are somewhere else, or even they have a device where the password is stored, and they are not very technical, so they just leave it somewhere, and someone else gets access, and they get passwords there. And maybe it says it's your computer and your passwords, and they didn't have any bad intent, but still someone else got access to them. And those changes are dangerous. So on the hardware side, okay, the unauthorized access I alluded to already. For example, with devices, rather modern, I think since 2008 or so, most laptops sold have this back door, and there are two different systems mainly, from Intel and from AMD, and both have this technology in the background, in the processor itself, that the company, in theory, can access on very low level your own device and can bypass every software installed on it. So if you really want to have a private system, it's almost impossible to do it with those modern systems. Of course, if you do normal work or have video editing and so on, the old devices might not be very interesting for you because you cannot do practical work with them anymore. Because if you have high resolution videos and want to cut it there, It might be possible, but in a big amount of time, basically. So maybe if you have very high demands on your security, you could use an old computer for communication, because that is not very demanding, and do the creative work or whatever you need to do with that is more demanding on your hardware on this device, and just not connect those two. And that might be a good solution for being more secure with what you are doing. Also crippled components, an example would be the iOS devices and so on. They are deliberately limited in what they can do. And there's this old story where the first generation, for example, of those iPads had very good quality recording audio files. And the second generation, they disabled it. Of course, the hardware didn't get worse, but they just disabled it because they didn't want people to do that. And of course, there's no technical reason to do that. It's just business. And it's not in your interest that devices are built that way. Yeah, and of course, if the hardware breaks, if your hard disk breaks, then there's data loss, and that's a security aspect as well. If you use your lose your backups, or if you didn't make backups from your data, and your device breaks down, you might lose the data, and it might be very important to you. So a very important part of computer security as well, reliability, and it also depends on making backups and being able to actually restore those backups. In many cases, people make backups, but they never check if they can restore it until they have a problem, and then they discover they never tried, and they're actually not able to restore it. So we should try that as well. And there are solutions that can do that. And more easy ones and so on. It depends on your use case, what you want to use there, but you should be aware of that. Yeah, I made more or less the points already. I don't need to go through them again. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's the same here. Yeah, okay, and other label or area in software is as well. A lot of software, my best example is always the Adobe Cloud or Adobe Suite, however you want to call it. I'm as a graphic designer, all my colleagues work with Adobe, but I switched to free software and I love it. And the main reason why I love it is because I'm not dependent on Adobe and their policies and their updates and so on. I can just do whatever I want. I install my software and I can upgrade it, and I have never to think about what file format do I need to use that others can actually make use of that. Because free software is based on open standards, and every program that wants to support those standards can, because it's openly documented, and every program can use those standards. And proprietary software, like Adobe Suite, they do that, because why shouldn't they? But their own standards, they normally use as the default file format to save stuff. That's not open. And therefore, and they do that deliberately, to limit other programs, and that's saying, that most people have the impression, if I use Adobe, I can work with everyone. But if I use free software, I can only work with few people because nobody uses it. But that's not true. The opposite is true. If you use the free formats, even Adobe can read it, and other private companies and the software products from them. But the problem is, almost nobody uses those open formats because those big corporations try to get the people to use their own proprietary standards so that nobody else can use them, and mostly not even older versions of the same software. So you need to keep updating your own software and paying for it. And if you don't have a lot of money, that might be an issue. Therefore, I recommend, especially for people who are not swimming in money, try to invest some time in using free software. In the beginning, it might be different, and it might be a bit of working of process and so on. It might be not even as convenient, but in the long run, you don't have all those problems that you, for example, cannot share the program with a friend and say, okay, I made this design, you can use it as well. Because if you have free software, you can just install it there, and it's totally allowed. You can share it with as many people as you want, and you can show them how it works. And documentation online is very good, and it's very easy to get everyone on board. The only problem is people normally are not used to it, because in schools and wherever you will get introduced in those techniques, for example, graphics design in this area, they will use Adobe. And therefore everyone is used to Adobe, and everyone thinks they need to use it. So yeah, and even I talk to professionals. I have a friend who is, for example, into archiving video files, long-term archiving big amounts of video files, for example, for libraries or something, or TV stations and so on. And there's free software, for example, that does the same job as the really expensive proprietary stuff they normally use. It's sold for, I think, 20,000 euros, one working place. And you get free software that does the same work in half the time, in double the quality. But even the big TV stations don't want to use it because everyone uses something else. And it's just, they're not used to it and they think, okay, it's something I don't know and therefore I don't want to use it. So it's just the beginning, the problem. Yeah. Then, yeah, I already alluded to the networks as well. So surveillance and unavailable remote data. That's really a big thing. You can every time be cut off of your own data, so you should be really aware of what you stored on your own device and what you stored on the cloud. And yeah, what else do we have? Yeah, okay, if you do backups, for example, there's the easy way that you just connect an external disk to your device and the software that can actually do it automatically. As soon as you plug it in, it makes the backup. And there are incremental backups as well, so it might not do much because you didn't change all files since the last backups, and then it needs just 2 minutes or so to do the backup actually, but you have a full backup of this date of time, and that's very easy and convenient to do. But of course, if your flat burns down or something like that, then a local backup might not be good enough. So I would recommend, of course, doing local backups, but it might be as well, depending on the situation, interesting or good to have a remote backup. And of course, you can use their services, even from big corporations and so on, that do online backups. But if you choose to do that, I would recommend, especially if you have data you think is not public for anyone, you should only use it by encrypting it first and then uploading it to their service, because otherwise they would have access to all your data. So of course there are different solutions to do that, and I think many of them already have this option that you can upload encrypted versions of your data, so that they don't even have the chance, even if they wanted to read your data. But you need to be aware that that might be an issue. Of course, you can as well carry a second backup of your data if you don't do it that frequently, or if you make just one very basic one where all important stuff is once a year or something, and you can carry it somewhere else, a friend's space or something, and store it there and do that every year. Then you have at least a very important state for you somewhere else if something on your location happens to the hardware. Yeah, and something about the passphrases as well, of course. Yeah, in the past, I always thought, okay, you need to use a very cryptic passphrases, and in fact, that's not really true. If you look into the science done by people, working with that in that area, because they say much more important is first that you actually use the passphrases properly, so you should be able to remember it, and secondly, the longer the passphrase is more important than the how complex the passphrase is. Because computers are very quick in trying through a big amount of possibilities. And there it's much more difficult to do it for a long string of signs, or what is the chars, than for a short, very complicated one, because there are only so many signs you could potentially use. But if each char you add to it, the complexity multiplies. So the longer the passphrase is, if you have a whole sentence, for example, it's much more secure than a short, complicated one. And of course, it's not the best idea to have a logical sentence, because that might be easy to try through. And especially if it's somehow related to you, if someone can learn something about you and think, okay, yeah, maybe they used the name of her grandma and the name of the town where she lived or something like that. Or if you have a quote you use very often and you might use or input that in your passphrase, something like that might not be the best choice, because others might know about it or learn about it somehow if they read through your notes or something like that. So it should be something obscure, not really connected to you. But it should be long, and there is good websites, for example. I think you're going to have it on the materials there, I guess, Well, if not, I can give it to you anyway. Diceware, for example, is such a name, and they have just a big library online with random words, and you can have different languages there, and you just type in, okay, I want to have 7 random words, and there's just the words, and you can do it, for example, in German, or you can have 9 or 5, you can choose how many you want, and it has statistics as well. It tells you how complicated it will be, computer systems, to try to break it by brute force, by trying every combination, how long it will take. And it's very fun to look how many words and how long it takes then for a normal system to do that. Even so, in many cases, everything over 25 or something signs is rather hard. And if you have, for example, the police trying to get in your device, they most of the time will not have the resources to put that much in. Of course, as with statistics it is possible that they get the right thing at first try. But very likely is they will have a longer time than that. And of course, those times mentioned there in the statistics are the times they would have to guaranteed break your passphrase. So it could be that's quicker, but it's not very likely it's much quicker. And therefore you have a good way to estimate how hard it will be to break those passphrases with the statistics that are online. So it's fun to look at that. And the good thing about words, using words for passphrases, is you can make a story in your head for those passphrases. And of course another thing is as well, you can, but the solutions, you can use a password manager, for example. And there are 2 different versions how you can use password managers. The one thing is on your system directly, and if you have free software that's always already included, then you can use that. Or you can install a third-party password manager. But the one password you use for this password manager should be a very good one, of course. And as well, there is this encryption. There are different ways or things you could encrypt. For example, if you encrypt your whole computer, that is good if you leave it somewhere and somebody else takes it away because you're not there or whatever. And if it's encrypted and not switched on, they have no way to get to this data. Of course, they could wipe the computer totally and use it that way then, but they have no way to get to your data. So hard disk encryption always protects only your data if it's switched off. If it's switched on, the hardware encryption doesn't help you, because then people can just go into the system and get the data that way. So you should be aware, if you use hard disk encryption, which I recommend doing, it's only for if a device gets stolen and people try to get the data that way. Then there's, for example, email encryption, which is rather nice. We at VVD use it all the time. And it's just very easy to do. You set it up once, you get a key pair. I have the leaflet here, which describes how it works. And you can find lots of information online. And most email clients support this. It's just set up once with a key pair. And you have a private key, you should keep private, and you have a passphrase for that. Should be a good one as well. And you have a public key. You can post it everywhere, you can send it to everyone. And with this public key, people can only do one thing. They can encrypt messages for you specifically. And only you with your private key and your passphrase can decrypt it. So everyone else checking the network traffic and so on, they can maybe see that you get an email and maybe the subject line, depending if they encrypt the subject line or not. That's a separate issue. But they can only see you got an email and from who it, or from where it came, but they cannot ever access the data without your private passphrase and your private key. So the private key should be always safe on your device, and the public key you can give away for everywhere, and it is never a security risk. The only thing is, if for example, your computer breaks down, you should have a backup key from your private key, because if you lose your private key, you would be never able to read your old email again. So that was in the past sometimes an issue with my colleagues because they lost their passphrases, and they of course can make a new key, but the old emails are just not accessible anymore. Nobody can read them. So you should keep that in mind as well. The same is actually true for hard disk encryption as well. If you lose the key for your hard disk encryption, nobody can help you. If you have it only once, and it should be somewhere in a backup, or if there's even a recommendation I make. If you have a complicated passphrase, generally you shouldn't write it down. And it's a good idea to try to memorize it. But if you want to get sure that you have a chance to restore it after you've forgotten it, maybe you go to holidays, didn't type it for 2 months or something like that, and then you come back and you cannot remember it, then you should have a fallback solution. Of course, you could store it in another device in an encrypted container or whatever and find it there, but it would be another passphrase. But if you want to have it somewhere on paper, try to write it down with errors, deliberately errors. So add something in the beginning or in the middle, or change something, leave something out or something like that, and just remember what you changed with it. Then nobody finding this thing can ever use it because they don't know what you changed or how long it should be or whatever. And then it's still rather secure and a big help for you if you keep forgetting stuff. Yeah, that's a thing I would say that you could do. Yeah, it's an old standard, 14 characters long. I think it's more in the meantime because the computer got stronger in the meantime. So I would not go only for 14 years. Yeah, okay. Password manager. Yeah, okay. Another thing is, we all have many online accounts and so on. And of course, you should never use the same passphrase twice or more times. A good solution might be that you try to make some system for yourself. Find out, okay, I normally invent new passphrases and think about my clothes I wore there and build that into my passphrase or whatever. So that it's not really related to the task you're doing or something. It doesn't really matter what you do. It's only important that you have the system in your head and you can restore the passphrases from your memory by using the system and telling, of course, nobody the system you have. And another way, of course, with the password managers is they're only good for on your own system if you just use one system. But if you have more devices, for example, one for work and one privately, and maybe another one for specific tasks, then it's hard to do it with one password manager on one system. You would need to have a constant copy of the actual system on every device and copy it around. And therefore, then the online password managers might be interesting. But the online password managers, you need to trust, of course, the service again. And therefore, you need to look around and so on. If you want to do that, then you should be very careful with that, because it's very important. It's like using a VPN account. This is as well for internet privacy and so on. I can go into that as well. But every external service you need to trust if you want to have security by default in that case. That is, okay, this is, for example, with VGD, we have very many our own services from our own administrator on our own server. Therefore, I trust our administrator and therefore I trust what he's doing. But if it would be a third party, even someone I don't know, a company, then I wouldn't be so trust, what is the word for that? I wouldn't trust them, yeah, basically. Yeah, and I mentioned that before as well, that you should change passphrases after you have told them someone. Another good practice is if you need to tell someone a passphrase, you could make a one-time passphrase for them beforehand. For example, if you need to give your device away and say someone else should use it, make an additional account. Most devices allow that. Make an especially guest account for them. We did that with those devices for the conference. You can log in there, you can use it, and you can afterwards just delete the whole account, and it's gone. And it was easy to use for everyone. I would recommend that even over giving a special password for your own account, because usually you do have your private data or any data you don't want to share with everyone. So if you need that, to do that. And yeah, mobile phones are a different subject. They're constantly a problem because, for example, even Android, it basically uses free software, but with many add-ons. So if you want to have a free system on a phone, it's very hard to accomplish. And I would say at the moment it's not really possible. There are some obscure systems that might be better, and there are even some tries to do it with Android. For example, the E system tries to replace every Google service with their own service, so you need to trust the E company, which might be better because they don't sell anything, well, AdWords and so on, so they don't have a really big incentive to use this data. But still, it's a third party, you don't know exactly, and it depends how big your security demands are. But if you want to do secure work with your colleagues and so on, one of the most important things is to be aware that it's very hard to get good security with mobile phones. And especially if you use an iPhone. Of course, if you trust Apple totally, which I see no reason for, but if you do that, then it might be different for you. But you should be aware if you, for example, have discussions about things you want to do and nobody else should know about it, leave the phones away, give them out, or even if you remove your battery, nowadays with modern devices you cannot even do that. Therefore, it's hard to do that. So you leave it out of ear distance, give it to another room. Maybe a good thing would be a noisy room or something, and use it in another room and discuss that way. And another very practical thing, I think this leaflet will be very, very interesting for most of you because it's specifically written for activists, and you should take it then. One of these very easy things is, if you discuss things you want to do and don't want to share with many other people, discuss it really in a private circle and not in a public area where other people can listen to it. It's very basic, it's not computer security per se, but most of the time if information that shouldn't get out gets out, is because of such things, and not because you use the wrong encryption method. Most of the time it's very basic stuff. You told the wrong people could listen. Yeah, and yeah, of course, the aim of all this computer security thing, in my view at least, is we want to be independent on your computer from others. For example, if you're an activist, you have often the problem, you're fighting against big corporations and big, maybe even government, and they try to stop you. And they have a lot of resources. For example, they can tell the provider to just keep stopping providing you. And you should be prepared for that if you have really done stuff or want to do stuff that might be not in the interest of that influential players in the society. So you should be prepared for that. And maybe you're just writing emails and making petitions and so on, then it might not be that hard and you can dial down from the security measures you take. But you should be always aware there is no 100% security. That's one thing. Another thing is you will be only as secure as the weakest link in your security measures. So if you tell your friends everything, then that might be the easiest thing to get information from you, because maybe some detective or whatever tries to get the information from your friends, and they might be not very concerned about what they tell. Could be different areas. I will add something from the German thing now, because I think it's at the moment with still, because the Corona stuff, and we changed our measures as well. A lot of people use all those video platform things like MS Teams, Zoom, and however they are called. I'm not a fan of that, you might imagine, but there are free solutions to do that as well, and you could, depends, if you have your own server, you can install it on your own server and do your own service. But if you're not into that and don't have the resources for doing that, for example, in Austria there's a company, it's placed in Vorarlberg, they are called Faircom, with K, and they use only free software to do the same services that Google and so on does. And you wouldn't use Zoom there, you can get Jitsi, and they wouldn't use MS Teams, you could get, for example, Big Blue Button. Those are big things they do with Zoom and, let's phrase it otherwise. Jitsi does basically the same thing as Zoom does, or not in 100% because it's more for team meetings. If you don't have a few hundred people, Jitsi might be a good solution. And there's even a replacement for Skype. Very similar to Skype is Charmy. So Charmy, it's on my flyers I think as well. I will write it down or tell you later. It basically does the same thing. You wouldn't even need a server for that. You can just install the software on your device and it will connect to the other and you can make video conferences, but it's not built for many people. But if you have many people and want to make sessions with hundreds of people and so on, with different groups and whatever, then you could use Big Blue Button, and you could get it as well from this company I mentioned. I'm not affiliated with them, so it's not for me that they get any money, but there's just an example in Austria where you can get it, it's really local, and you don't need to trust any big corporation somewhere else. And for example, the links I mentioned here. Email self-defense.org, there you can find more information about email encryption, how you can set it up and so on. Directory.fsf.org is a good link if you want to search for free software that does the same thing you want to do with proprietary software. You can just put in, for example, I want video editing software, and it gives you a big list of software that works with video editing. And you can choose through look through this list and can install it because it's free software. You can install and deinstall it, and again, it doesn't matter. And just test it out and read if you like it and so on. Then Denoetic.com is a company in Romania actually. I bought my private device from them, for example, and they do something very specific. Only very few companies do, very small ones. You can get old systems by them, if you buy them. So they're refurbished systems, pre-2008, and they have even a free BIOS system there, so the most basic software you have on your system normally, and you can have it with LibreBoot there. It's not as cheap because you can get those devices for example, nowadays for 200 euros or so, and they sell it for 700 because they do the setup with the software as well, so you don't have to think about it anymore. So it's just one example, there are a few of them. And DuckDuckGo is just one example of a search engine and an alternative for Google. Or another one would be startpage.com. Some of them are on my list as well here. And I can give you even my card, I think I have my jacket in another room. And Door Project I didn't mention yet as well, is very important as well. If you want to connect to the internet, not letting know the target web page who you are and where the request came from. That might be very interesting. So most people use a VPN account for that, so virtual private network. You can get it for pay from different companies, or if you use Tor, it's very similar in the functionality it has. You can install it on your computer. It's basically a Firefox web browser with specific setup and a specific way to connect to the internet. And what it does is basically it hops from different server pages and computers to the final target, and each step in between knows only the step before, and therefore the least step knows only the last step, but not where you did the query request from. So it gets it's called onion service, and that the reason is it's encrypted to the first stop, then it's further encrypted to the next one and encrypted, and the layers get built up and torn down in the same way back again, and so nobody can actually tell where the original request came from. That's the basic concept of it. And that's the good thing about it, because you don't need to rely on another company to do that. It's a public service, and it's normally used, for example, I did it in the past as well, if you, for example, want to research stuff on the internet, which is for, in Austria, limited. You don't have access to it because they say, okay, the government has told us we shouldn't show it, and you cannot access it normally from Austria. But if you use Tor, you can, because the target website doesn't know that it came from Austria. It jumps to different countries and different areas and so on. Of course, you could have bad luck and the last jump was for your own area again, then you just reconnect and have a different route, and then you can access it. So it's always good if you want to have really private access to the internet and the target web page doesn't know where you are. Of course, if you log in on the target web page and you have an account there, it doesn't help you, because then it knows it's you because you logged in.